Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren from Beltline to Broadway, and I am with Charlie Williams, who I think sets the record for the furthest interview I've done to date. Because prior to you, it might have been New Zealand, but Tokyo is pretty far too. So, and we'll talk about what you're doing there and what's happening with your career in a second. But let's talk about your triangle roots, your North Carolina roots. Did you perform on stage? What's your theatrical background on our North Carolina stages? Were you on stage at Cary High School? They have a pretty vibrant,
yeah,
arts program.
I was. Well, I went to Martin Middle School, and that's where I discovered that I enjoyed theater. Shout out to Judy Dove, my teacher there, who introduced me to theater. And then, I went to Cary High School and was, active in the drama department there with Carol Lutz at Cary High. And then, and the whole time I was doing North Carolina theater stuff as well. So they gave me an amazing start to my Broadway life by introducing me to people that I still keep in contact to this day of equity performers that were coming down to do the shows. And I did a few shows there. I did like Joseph and Fiddler on the Roof and Cabaret, and it was fantastic.
This makes me so happy right now because I know North Carolina theater really prides itself on having that kind of Raleigh, New York Broadway connection. So it makes me so happy.
It's strong, that connection.
Yeah. How did those experiences growing up? I'm a big arts advocate for arts in schools. I think that's so important. How did those experiences growing up and having those experiences in middle school, high school, on regional stages like NCT, how did that inform who you became as an artist, as a dancer, as a choreographer?
I mean, it set me on the path to what I've done my entire adult life. So I mean, I don't know how much I can sort of stress the importance of the things that I learned while I was growing up and having access, especially, Martin being a magnet school and having, a dance studio in my middle school, like I could walk to the dance studio during lunch if I wanted to, and, do a ballet bar. Not that I did at that point, but if I wanted to, I could have. And it made all the difference. It really did. I definitely don't think I'd be sitting here in Japan right now talking to you about Broadway stuff if I hadn't had the start I had, there. So gave me everything.
And God bless the art teachers and the drama teachers like Judy, who kind of set young people on their way, kind of make them see all the things that are possible. I love that.
Absolutely. I still, every time I do anything, I still kind of send up a thank you prayer to them, being like, oh my gosh, I'm just so lucky that I had the start that I had, for sure.
So you've worked on several amazing Broadway shows, The Cher Show, How to Succeed, Miss Saigon, Hedwig, Memphis, and Frozen. I mean, that's quite a New York resume right there. And they're all such different shows, different styles of dancing, movement, different genres, music. Looking at these shows as kind of your body of work, though, are there any through lines that are any commonalities between all of these shows for you?
They're all really fun to work on. I felt very lucky to be on each one of them. You know what? I think one of my favorite things about my career and the things I've done, on Broadway and off Broadway is that it is so varied and so different. I love that I have this sort of career and I'm sort of, able to fit into these different shapes as far as working on Hedwig, being the movement resident on Hedwig, and then also being in Frozen and, associate choreographer on Frozen, I just feel like that's something I'm most proud of being able to be that sort of chameleon, if you will, of like, what do you need? Do you need a full Broadway number, you know, with top hat and tails? Great, I got you. Do you need like rocker movement that I can work with Neil Patrick Harris to try and get him to like find his center in his hips and like, you know, get him to find that head wig? Great, I can do that too. So to me, it's not really the amount of things I've done, but for me, it's really the difference and the variance of what I've done is really something I'm proud of.
And when you're working with people who are, you know, there are a lot of Broadway performers who are kind of fall into that triple threat, triple threat umbrella, who fall under that triple threat umbrella and do dance. But there are many who don't, especially kind of when you get into the celebrity names that need to drive and market a Broadway show. Oftentimes, when I've interviewed other choreographers, they've talked to me about making the performer feel comfortable, as opposed to kind of forcing movement on them. Have you found that as a choreographer that maybe adjusting moves so that you have that buy-in of even the non-professional dancer makes it work better?
Yeah.
More?
I mean, to answer the short answer to that question is 1,000%. You can't, being comfortable for a lot of these people who are, you know, on center and selling, you know, their names are in lights above the title. You know, whatever I say, Charlie Williams can't make them like, you know, I can't fit them into whatever box I see for myself and what I see in that role. I have to help them find what that is for them, you know, and then I've done a good job. I'm not here to tell them exactly how to, you know, how I want them to move. It's a collaboration, you know, so I can steer when I'm working with people who maybe dance isn't their first strength. You know, it's all about a combination of the two of us going on that journey together and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't and seeing what feels comfortable and pushing their boundaries in a good way, but not pushing their boundaries in a way that, you know, they lose confidence, because that's nobody wants to watch someone who's scared try to do something that they were told to do. They want to see someone take command of the production. So that's what I'm always aiming for. And
it's exhausting. And an 8-show week is a pretty demanding. So it's
exactly.
As we speak, you're in quarantine in Tokyo, where you'll be working on a tiny show called Frozen. People might have heard of it.
Exactly.
You were with Frozen before the shutdown in New York, and the replacement cast had just come into that show. Talk to me about the overall mood of the cast, the crew, when things shut down.
Oh, Lauren, how long do you have?
Listen, I would have given any amount of money to see Sierra Renee as Elsa.
She was incredible. She really was. And my heart still breaks that our new leads that we just had plugged into the show didn't get any more time than they'd got. You know, they got maybe a solid month, maybe. Yeah. Maybe they got a solid month. I don't know. I'm working with my therapist to block out the memories. Just so that time was so, it was such a crazy time. So for those of you who don't know, we had a big cast change right before the pandemic struck. And actually, at the time, I was performing. So I was on stage 8 shows a week in Frozen at the time. So I had jumped into the show as well, just a few weeks before that. And a few weeks before that, I had been in Australia casting the Australian production of Frozen. So as far as timeline goes, and I'll make it quick, I was in Australia casting the show for 2 weeks. I flew back, and then the next night I went on for the first time in the show. And for those of you who don't know, so I've been working on the show as associate choreographer since our out-of-town tryout in Denver, which is very different than actually doing the show. You know, I'm always, you know, zoomed out view of the show. I don't know exactly, I don't have every single track memorized all the time. So to jump into it after being gone for a while was kind of made my head spin, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking because, I didn't want to mess up the show that I had been working creatively on and embarrass myself in front of everybody. So then we did that. And at the same time, we were rehearsing this big, what we called a reboot. So we were rebooting the show, which is not really a technical Broadway term. That was just what we called it, where we had we were putting in a new song in Act 2 for Anna and Elsa. We were putting in a new Anna, a new Elsa, a new Olaf, and a new Hans. So we basically were changing the entire principal cast, as well as some tracking changes. So this was kind of our Disney shows, and shows in general sometimes do this. After a year, they'll kind of come back and take another look and, tweak it. So we were tweaking the show big time, and that's why we called it the reboot. So the cast had to go back into rehearsals. We kind of had to retech some of the shows. We had to do all these run-throughs for the new leads, obviously. I mean, you can't just walk into the St. James and play Elsa. We had to do all those rehearsals for the new leads. And then less than a month later, pandemic hit and we were closed. So.
And this isn't a little show. I mean, as with most things Disney, I saw this show with the original Broadway cast, and it's a big show with a lot of moving parts, a lot of Disney magic. Mm-hmm. The most incredible quick change I've ever seen on stage. I've actually watched it back on different videos to try to figure out how it's done. Because we had really good seats that night, and watching Elsa's quick change, being like, I don't know, we were in the 4th or 5th row, and I was like, oh, we're going to see it. We're going to see what's happening. And we didn't. Yeah. It was so fast.
Oh, good.
So there's a lot happening in the show. It's a big show. It's a big show.
It's a big show.
It's a big show. So when things did shut down, were you all of the mindset, similar to other shows that I've spoken to, that this is going to be a few weeks, leave everything where you are, leave the things in the refrigerator, leave the plants? I have spoken to people that said plants, everything was in the theater because they thought it was going to be a few weeks. Did you guys have that sense, or did you guys have the sense that this is going to be longer?
Well, I think we all had our own sort of feelings about it. I don't think anybody, if you asked them, would have thought we'd be where we are today, where Broadway is still shut down over a year later. I don't think anybody had that in their mind. But me, being the sort of pessimist that I am, I would have your thing and get out of here, y'all, because I don't know when we're coming back. I certainly didn't think it was going to be the 2 weeks that they initially had said, or month, or, at first it was a 2 week, then it was a month, then it was a couple months. And I was actually on my way into the theater that day when it all kind of was crumbling. Moulin Rouge canceled their performance, which was shock at the time. A Broadway show canceling one performance is huge news for us. That never happens. That's unheard of. So when we heard that Moulin Rouge was canceling, who's right across the street from us, we were like, uh-oh. And then I was on my way into a rehearsal to, like a regular weekly rehearsal at the St. James, when I got the call that said, don't come in. Or actually, I got the call that said, show's canceled tonight. But I didn't know if that meant I should still come into rehearsal, or, it was such a crazy time where we didn't know anything. So for me, I went in, said hi to everybody that was there, and grabbed all my most of my things just to be safe. And I'm glad I did, because I never went back. I mean, I didn't go back until 8 months later. Yeah. So it was everybody had their own. Everyone thought it was over a little bit too much to cancel the shows, that they were overreacting. Some people were scared. Some people, I know some of the cast members just got in a car right then and drove home to wherever they were from, because they kind of saw what was coming up on the horizon. And some people went out and party. Some people were like, oh my gosh, you have a day off work. and I feel great. Let's go to the bar. It was a time that nobody understood what was happening, including the Broadway League, I think.
I think so too. I mean, I think for me, the most shocking thing that day was when Six canceled their opening night. That's when I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. And it all happened within a matter of hours. It was like Moulin Rouge and then Six, and then everything was shut down.
Yeah.
Fast forward to last May, and I think it was last May, and it was announced that Frozen wouldn't be coming back when Broadway did reopen. And for me, keeping an eye on the regional theater front, whenever these kinds of announcements come out, it feels like such a blow, particularly when you see successful shows like Frozen and Mean Girls. They're the ones that are announcing they're not coming back. Obviously, both these shows, Mean Girls and Frozen, are going to have tour life. Obviously, Frozen's open in Australia. They're going to have a UK opening, Tokyo opening. There's life for these shows beyond Broadway. What's it like for the cast and crew when you get that notice that, not only are we shut down, we're not coming back?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. There's never a good way to get your closing notice. I've gotten many a closing notice in my time, and they're all been different. And some shows I've been ready to leave, and some shows I've been not ready to leave, and anywhere in between. And truly, either way, it's still not fun to get a closing notice. It's just not. So especially, and included in that scenario is when it's a global pandemic and you've been out of work for 6 months, or not even 6 months, a few months. So yeah, it was a punch in the gut, I will say. That was a hard day for everybody because there was so many unknowns, and by that point we'd all been in this quarantine in New York City, which is not something I'd recommend. I mean, we're all stuck in these tiny apartments for those couple months, and we were all feeling pretty blue. But I think even if we didn't want to admit it, the idea that we had that show for us to go back to, like there was still some light at the end of the tunnel to get back to what we were doing. We still could go back and we still could see those people again. And we were still lucky to be on a Broadway contract. So after those 2 months where everything was still kind of every day you woke up to, rises in the coronavirus, and you woke up to your bank account getting lower, and you woke up to all this bad news in the world. And then you wake up one day and it's a call from Disney to say, also, your job doesn't exist anymore when this does go back. It was a real bummer, and especially since, like I said, we'd just done all that work on the show. So, on top of the fact that we didn't even, we didn't get to say goodbye to everybody. We didn't get to, when you get a closing notice, usually it's not, you're closed. You get a closing notice, not a closed notice. And we got a closed notice, which I think is probably up there with some of the worst things ever. But the idea that we couldn't go back and we couldn't have that last bow and we couldn't see each other and do our fun thing that we do on stage left before we enter, or say hi to that crew guy that hands you your prop. And, there's a lot of things that you do when you're closing a Broadway show and just kind of take it in one more time. It's like graduation. You look at your locker one more time, or you take a lap around the cafeteria with your friend, or whatever you do. You kind of do your own thing to say goodbye to the space and the experience. And we didn't get to do that. So that's something that will always kind of stink about the whole situation. But that it's on top closure. Of the fact that, yeah,
it's that closure.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't get that. And so we still haven't gotten it. The people that I bowed with on that Wednesday night, I still haven't seen them. I just had seen them 8 times a week and in between and in rehearsals every day. I went from seeing these people my entire week, day in and day out, to I haven't seen them in over a year, which is so weird to me. So I don't recommend getting a closed notice for anybody out there. It's not fun.
Hopefully we won't see many more of those, and we'll just see opening soon notices or reopening notices.
Fingers
You
crossed.
did mention the changes in the show, the reboot in the show, which I actually was very excited about for this show because I felt I had mixed feelings about this show from
Yeah.
bringing the kids into Broadway, bringing making Broadway lovers out of this next generation of children. I'm all for that, but I also felt like the show.
You can give me. I want your full opinion. You don't have to shield me from my.
It was kind of missing something for me, Charlie.
That's
I'm a
totally.
huge Disney fan. I love Disney.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I watched Frozen many times in my house, and so I wanted more from it. And so I'm wondering the changes that were made right before the shutdown, have those changes stuck in the international productions that are now opening?
Yeah. So, well, the good news for you, Lauren, and actually, let me share a secret. Frozen's missing some things for me too, and I'm still working on it. So, so we'll keep that between ourselves. Don't tell anybody else about that.
Don't tell anybody.
But I'm doing my best. I'll tell you this: I'm doing my best to try and fix the things that are missing for me. So send me a list, and I'll see if I can get these in here for Tokyo for you.
I'll be right over.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, fly right over, and we'll do it. Yeah, the changes that we put in what I'm calling the reboot is yes, they are they did go into Australia and they are going into Tokyo. But the other thing is now there's been the Broadway company. Well, let's even include, we did the Denver company, we did the Broadway company, we did the first national tour company, we did the Australian company, and now we're doing the Tokyo company. Out of all those companies, there's not been an exact replica of any show. So each of those companies exists in a different way. There's changes here, there's changes there. There's smaller changes that maybe some people wouldn't know. There's also big ones that everybody would know. So like there are things like on the tour, there's no turntable in the floor, so that changes some of the blocking. And then, like I said, there's songs that were added for the reboot and cut for the reboot, so that was a big change that would definitely be noticeable. So yes, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but the answer is yes, they did stick. The changes did stick. So the new songs and the things are in every production now.
So I was going to say, when we see Frozen go back out on the road in the United States, someone goes back out on tour, we'll see those changes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you see the Frozen tour and you saw the opening night of Broadway, you will see two different shows. Yes.
Okay. Very, very nice.
Don't get your hopes crazy up now. If you see the tour.
Well, and I will say, the biggest earworm of a song, and this isn't a bad thing, but Higgy, that song, oh man, that song.
Oh, Hooga, yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you haven't heard that song and you want a Broadway earworm, download that song will stick with you for months.
Please tell me about it. It's still in my head.
So I want to talk about Ciara Renee for a minute.
Yeah.
Not only is she the most stunning, I saw her in The Wrong Man, and I
did too.
fell in love with her.
Yeah.
Her voice.
Her voice. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, her voice. But was she the first permanent Black Elsa in that role? And I know there were understudies, but what was she?
There were understudies for sure. Yeah, we had people called to play Elsa before, but yeah, Ciara was the first permanent. Yeah, Black Elsa.
Okay. Perfect. And I know we saw it in the UK. Disney is very inclusive in their casting, and we were talking about this for a minute before we went on. I know on Broadway they've been inclusive. The theme parks just adopted a gender inclusive rules for their cast members. We've seen diversity and inclusivity in its film properties as well. My husband and son were watching The Falcon and Winter Soldier this morning. During this pandemic, we've seen this rising up in the We See You white American theater movement. It's been really exciting to watch. I'm wondering, and maybe it doesn't affect Disney as much because I feel like Disney was kind of doing the work prior to We See You white American theater movement. But do you think we're going to experience a cultural shift in casting, in the types of stories we're going to see on Broadway, and maybe even in the people who get to tell those stories?
1,000%. I mean, even Disney, you're absolutely right. Tom Schumacher and Disney theatricals and Disney just, as a brand, I think are, they've always tried to tell sort of stories that haven't been told. Which is important. And Tom Schumacher, especially, I feel like with Disney theatricals, has always kind of, cast, it's funny to even say like gone out on a limb and actually cast a person of color. Like, what the heck are we even that right there is like, what are we talking about?
2021.
So, yeah, exactly. There's like, obviously there's changes that need to be done in all of our mindsets about casting. And like you said, stories we tell and who tells those stories. So yeah, we're going to see a shift. We're already seeing a shift, and Broadway hasn't even opened again. So it's a much needed change. And I'm really excited to see what, new voices get to, tell their stories in a great way. Even like I said, Disney being already kind of at the forefront of doing a better job at being inclusive. Even they have a lot of things that they need to, they're doing the work. Tom, early on in the pandemic, in the quarantine, once Frozen shut down, he's meeting with all the cast on Broadway and talking to them about things that they've felt in the workplace and they haven't felt in the workplace and everything in between. So Disney's ramping it up to try and, step up to the plate and do what needs to be done.
I love that. So Frozen opened in Australia. That's one of the few places in the world that theaters have reopened at this point. Talk about the audiences there for a minute, and what can we in the United States learn from audiences and artists there as we inch closer to reopening here?
Yeah, well, I mean, being in Australia was such a crazy mind trip for me, coming from the States and coming from New York, especially, and going, for a while there being the sort of hot spot of the pandemic early on, to then being in Australia where, for the most part, they really, even this was 6 months ago, had it under control in terms, as far as American standards go. They were still freaking out and doing what they needed to do. I'd turn on the news in Australia in the afternoon, it'd be like, breaking news, COVID rise, 5 cases, like they would freak out at 5 or 10 cases, in Sydney. And I'm like, oh my God, we would be like having a parade in the streets if it was 5 or 10 cases, and they're like locking down. So, and because of that, they really got things under control down there. Which is why I was able to go. So the audiences were hungry for theater. They were excited to be there. We had all these sort of, we had PPE. We were doing all the protocols and precautions that we needed to do to open the show down there, which we did on time without, any hiccups or anybody getting sick. So it was really a sort of felt in a way a little bit of a guinea pig as far as theater and the times of COVID goes, because we were the first major international production to happen. So I was really proud of that, to sort of helm that one. And it's still running, and it's about to move to Melbourne, and audiences are showing up, and it's a great feeling.
Are audiences required to wear masks there?
They are, yes. So there's so many things that make it safer. Obviously there's hand sanitizer everywhere. Everything is sanitized. The seats are sanitized. The theater is sanitized. Excuse me. There's a lot of, everything's super, super washed down and safe. When you're in the theater, you do have to wear a mask as you watch, but nobody seemed to have a problem with that. I thought, oh, this is going to be a nightmare because, people are going to be taking it off, and the ushers are going to be, shining their flashlights, and it's going to kind of ruin the experience. But truthfully, I saw the show every night I was there. So I saw the show, probably 40 times. There never once was a problem. I've actually seen more problems with people taking pictures on their cell phones and having that interrupt the show than any of the masks. So that was a pleasant surprise. And it was great.
What precautions were taken to keep the performers safe and the actors safe during the rehearsal process and once the show opened?
So rehearsal process, we wore PPE, we wore masks when we needed to. And then when it was time to do something, when we were just rehearsing and kind of blocking and figuring things out, we were all in masks. And when obviously I didn't say either, when the actors are on stage, they're not wearing masks. They're obviously mask free while on stage. And there was also zones. We had a lot of zones. So when when we were in tech rehearsal, the house was one zone, zone A, and then backstage and the on stage and the dressing rooms were zone B. So you really couldn't go between zones to stop if there was any sort of contamination or anyone getting sick. Then they'd only put their zone at risk. So they did a lot of zoning, which seemed to really help a lot. And if I say I was in rehearsal up until the half hour while the audience was coming in, I'd have to go through a pretty rigorous change up of PPE and hand washing, and I had to wear boots, like booties on, like sometimes in the hospital you have to wear over my shoes to change between. It was kind of like a decontamination zone in a sci-fi movie, when like the astronaut comes in from outer space or something. I had to kind of go through a booth to go into the other zone. So every precaution was taken, and it ended up working out.
This sounds a little more like Contagion than Frozen, I feel like.
Exactly. Maybe that's the next new Broadway musical, right?
Contagion, the musical.
The musical.
How do you think Frozen play in Japan?
I gotta tell you, I mean, this is so I've now been in Japan for I've been in quarantine the whole time, but I have no idea what Japan is going to be like. I've never been to Japan before. I've had many Zoom calls with the theater company called Shiki Theater Company that's sort of running things here and putting up the show. Disney and Shiki have a partnership, and Shiki does a lot of the, they do every Disney show, Aladdin and Lion King, everything. So it's going to be a wild ride. Obviously, there's a big language barrier. The show's going to be in Japanese here, which is interesting for me. I've already heard a couple read-throughs of the show in Japanese, which is kind of a mind trip, and to hear all these same tunes but sung in Japanese. But I do know this is that the Japanese people and the Japanese theater company here are so hungry for the show that I do believe that if Disney had their way, and some of it were like, let's just wait until the dust settles a little bit more, and let's just see if, let's push it back to the fall. But Japan was like, we need this. We need live theater. We want Frozen. This is going to really lift everyone's spirits, and we want it now. So here I am in Tokyo. They're hungry for it. So I can't wait.
Have you heard Let It Go in Japanese yet?
I have.
You must.
I have. And it's funny, once I've actually never really seen, this is my first, obviously, Australian company wasn't quite the same as hearing it in Australian was pretty similar. But hearing it in a different language, your ear, I thought, oh, it's going to be really weird for me. Like, I'm not going to like attach to it the way I did, but your language barrier sort of lets go, literally let it go really early on, and you just kind of hear the melodies, and it almost elevates the performance because you're watching them and you're hearing it a little bit differently, and you're not hanging on to every word. You're just hearing the way that they're singing it and their expressions in their voice. And it's weird. Even 4 years later of working on the show and being in the show and doing all this stuff, I'm finding yet another layer of Frozen and a way to connect to it in Japanese. And who would have thought?
Who would have thought? And I feel like that's the same with opera. If you watch opera and it's in a different language, you don't get hung up on the lyrics so much. You get hung up on the emotion and
exactly
the beauty of it, the grandeur of it, and what's happening, the relationships that's happening on stage.
Exactly.
You've compared the Frozen storyline. I read in a Time Out article where you compared the Frozen storyline kind of to the pandemic and the isolation we've all felt over this past year. So what are some of the parallels between Frozen and the pandemic in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I was saying that a lot in Australia. What a time to be doing a show like this about isolation, about solitude, about being locked behind closed doors. I mean, I'm literally talking to you from quarantine right now, locked behind a door. So if that doesn't give me any sort of insight into what Elsa was feeling, it's just a time. It's also a time, when we were in Australia, it was the presidential election was happening. So, and this is about crowning a new queen, electing new leaders, being locked behind closed doors. It just lends itself so well to the times we're in, and finding that connection with family, overcoming, obstacles, in yourself and Elsa's powers and all the parallels that, go along with that about feeling self-confident. And I just feel like it couldn't be a better time to see Frozen than during this pandemic.
And it's so interesting because I feel like Disney is so great at finding stories that really are timeless and that take on a different meaning depending on when you see them. If you see some of those older Disney movies now, everything still feels relevant. And for the most part, I mean, there are some Disney titles I know that are problematic. We won't talk about those, but I mean, as far as the recent years of Disney, I feel like they're just very good at finding stories that resonate no matter when you're watching them. And Frozen's one of those. It's amazing.
For sure. And it's all about, right now I feel like with all the bad that we've all been through in this past 12 months, it's also the communities that are forming out of this, and the sort of connection, like I said, to your family who you may not have been able to spend as much time with now, or the community that's coming together to bring Broadway back or to rebuild, our economy or whatever. It's the same, like, not to make too many parallels here, but Frozen, as far as they're dealing with a winter that shuts down their economy and their town for this period of time, and they all have to come together and figure out what to do. In Frozen, they don't necessarily make all the right decisions because they kind of go with a kill the beast mentality in a way. But it's I just think there's so many parallels that can be drawn from it during this time.
What would surprise people most about this production? About, if I were if you gave me the backstage tour, or I was a fly on the wall as they were getting ready to put this production on, what would surprise me most?
I think what I would say to that is the heart of the show. Um, I think you kind of touched on it too, Lauren, is that like when you see the show and you're expecting this is Frozen, this is Disney, this is it's going to be a lot of Disney magic and bells and whistles. And truthfully, we don't necessarily have we don't have a magic carpet that flies out over the audience. We don't have Pride Rock that spins up out of the ground and carries Simba up, and an elephant that walks down the aisle. That's not this show, for good and for bad. But what we do have is a lot of heart. And I think that the show, and it's the best thing about the show is that it could be done in a black box theater. Michael Grandich, the director, is from the Donmar Warehouse, which is a tiny, tiny theater in London that does small productions. And he's a Shakespearean director, and he's, came into this production pushing the story, pushing the heart, pushing the emotion of it. So we do, not to say we don't have a lot of really cool stuff that happens in the show, because we do, but if you could do the show, I think, in a black box theater by candlelight, and there could still be something for everybody. We don't rely on it. It's not a spectacle that relies on pyrotechnics and the magic carpet. The actors are the magic carpet in our show. So I think that would surprise people, that it might not be exactly what you're expecting, hopefully in a good way.
And I do feel like the movement, the dancing, the costumes, it's beautifully visually, it's a beautiful show. It really is, even without a magic carpet or pyrotechnics. Yeah. It really is visually a beautiful show, and the way the costumes move and the performers move is pretty stunning. Do you have a favorite number to either perform on stage or watch from the wings?
There's a number in Act 2 called Colder by the Minute. We sometimes call it Whiteout, that I love to watch, because that's really where we were able to kind of stretch our legs in the choreography department. Because in essence, it's basically an empty stage, but all the actors are all dressed in white, and they're all bundled up in these coats. And it was a big challenge for us to make a big sort of, it happens later in the show, so it needs to be exciting, and it's kind of the climax of the whole show in a way. And so it was a big challenge for us to make an empty stage really, really exciting, full of actors in these giant winter coats. So it's not like we could do an amazing ballet, that we're all hunkered down for winter. So I'm really proud of the work we've done creatively on that number. And then as an actor it's really fun to kind of rush around. There's so many traffic patterns, and we're singing, and it's also, a bass line. So I get to sing really low if I'm on stage in that number, which I enjoy. So I think Colder by the Minute is my favorite.
To perform and to watch from the wings?
Yeah, I'm going to go with both on that one, Lauren. I'm going to say yes to both.
All right, cool. We have a lot of young people, aspiring performers who follow Beltline to Broadway. Some of them have been auditioning for programs, college programs. What advice would you have for them as they look forward to starting their careers?
I would say the Beltline to Broadway is full of twists and turns and on ramps and off ramps and tolls, and it's a hilly climb. So make sure you got all-wheel drive. I don't know. It's really, I'm
using that as my promo from now on. The Beltline to Broadway. That's perfect.
It's yours. There's on-ramps and off-ramps, baby. It's just a hard, even I feel really lucky to be able to say, when you list off the things I've done, even I'm like, oh my God, that's cool. I didn't even, I don't sit here and think about the number of Broadway shows I've done, but even hearing it, I'm just like, wow, that's really, I'm take a moment of gratitude there. but it's not, that doesn't mean that I've been like on easy street since Cary, North Carolina. You know, it's a hard, twisted journey to go on, you know, even at the best of times, you know, even in Tokyo, you know, it's not as glamorous as it looks. Now, it's amazing and fun and incredible, but you just got to know what you're signing up for. And a short story I'll tell you to all the young people out there is that, so when Frozen was happening originally, the creative team was different on Broadway. And I was working on a workshop of something else when they were auditioning for Frozen. And I obviously wanted to be in it. It was Frozen the musical. This is going to be, you know, this is going to be the next Lion King. This is going to be it. Like, and there was a whole, you know, side note, there's a whole thing about the cast possibly sharing a little bit of percentage, meaning that they would get a little bit, the original cast, sort of like the Hamilton cast did, get a little bit of money for how well the show did. And so that was exciting. It's like, oh my gosh, if you're in Frozen, you're going to be rich for the rest of your life. So everybody wanted to get this job. Cut to, I couldn't go to the audition because of another job I was working on. I was so bummed. Devastated. Cut to, I actually ended up, they didn't find what they needed to find. So they had a whole nother round of auditions 6 months later. So it's just goes to show, don't give up. Well, I went to the round of auditions 6 months later. I got cut. Devastated. So sad that I didn't get the show. Cut to, I'm doing Miss Saigon, and who I work for a lot, Rob Ashford, who I am associate with on this show, he says, by the way, he whispered to me at my Miss Saigon opening night, I'm going to do, it's just about to be announced that I'm going to take over as choreographer for Frozen. And I'm like, damn, I'm in Miss Saigon right now. Like, I can't leave. You can't just leave a Broadway show on opening night. I can't believe it. I can't be on the show. Cut to, I ended up, after long story short, I ended up being able to leave Miss Saigon and join up with Frozen. So, and then I was an associate on Frozen, and now I'm in Tokyo talking to you about Frozen 4 years later. So all those devastating moments of, I can't audition for the show. I can't even, oh, now I can, and I didn't get the show. Well, now the people I work with are working on the show and I can't be a part of it. To now, it just all falls into place. So that was the abridged version of keep going, chase after your dreams, twists and turns, on and off ramps. You'll get there eventually and you'll end up right where you need to be. But it's know that you're buckling up for a bumpy road on a good day and a bad day.
I love that. What has 2020 and this year of the shutdown, what has it taught you about yourself and being an artist?
Yeah, it's taught me a lot that I'm still kind of trying to unravel and figure out. The arts are such a blessing, and I've been so lucky. I'm 33 now, and I've been working consistently since I left Cary High School, you know. But what it did for me is it put a pause in the hustle and bustle of it all, the clawing your way to the next job, and the figuring out, and the taking class, and the teaching class, and the auditioning, and the getting the Broadway show, but it's not quite the Broadway show that you thought it was, and you want to get one more, and then you want to do another thing, and then you want to. There's no end in the Broadway washing machine. You know, you're constantly on a spin cycle, and so this pandemic, I think, for a lot of Broadway performers, has said no. There is no dance class you can go take. Nope, there is no audition. Nope, you aren't going to go take an acting class in person. You're not going to go do your 8-show week. You need to stop and sit still and think about what you've done. You know, you need to stop and reassess and look at your life and say, hey, do you love doing this? Do you still love doing this? Or is it just kind of now the next thing and the next thing and the next thing? Or, you know, and the answer might be yes, you know, or what I'm trying to say is that it's taught me that there is no right answer, and just to reassess and look into yourself and make sure that you're filling your days with joy, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think I took some things for granted maybe before the pandemic, as far as 8-show a week and doing these rehearsals, and I'm so tired, and I live in a studio apartment in Midtown, and it's dirty on the streets, and I'm, you know, wah. And some of those I still agree with. And some of them I'm like, Charlie, maybe we're complaining a little bit too much. You know what I mean? So it's just a good way to like stop and take stock of what your life is and what you want. And, you know, because if you want to live in a 3-bedroom house and mow your lawn every day, you can do that on Broadway, but it's just a little bit harder. You know, you're probably not going to do that. You know, you're probably not going to do, everything's a trade-off. So that's where I'm kind of figuring out where I'm going to reassess and like what's going to happen when Broadway comes back. Because for me, I don't know if I really want to still be on stage anymore. I'm trying to more transition to creative, and that's a whole nother hill to climb. Or if I want to get another job or start teaching more, or, you know, work regionally a little bit more, I don't know. So it's really given me an opportunity to take a step back and reassess and try to figure that out. And so I don't know, stay tuned for whatever I come up with in the end.
Well, I love that. Maybe it'll bring you home to North Carolina, maybe do some work at NCT. I don't know, but I would love to see that happen too, just for us. Thank you.
Yes,
so
please.
much.
Eric Woodall, I'm coming for you, babe.
Eric.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.